All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Lamont, and welcome to NYO Canada Online Workshops. Our YouTube live chat is open, and we will be fielding questions throughout the workshop. So please feel free to post any comments, questions, as well as chat amongst each other. Today, I am thrilled to introduce Kehoe, the Executive Director of Tafelmusik Baroque Orchestra and Chamber Choir. Welcome, Carol.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much. And thank you to the Youth Orchestra for inviting me to speak today. It's always a privilege to speak to young people and young professionals going into the arts industry, whether as artists or as workers. And so I'm delighted to be able to talk to you today. Just to give you a little sense of what I'm going to talk about as the consideration between being an artist and an arts worker. I actually only joined the arts sector about 20 years ago. And previous to that, I actually I worked in the media. I ended up as my last job there formerly was director of marketing at the London Free Press. And because of the media experience, I was able to move over into the arts sector, into an area that I actually loved. But it comes with the fact that I am only an arts patron. I'm not an arts creator, and I've never seen myself that way. And I think that's been one of the benefits for me working in the industry, in the arts industry. But I do have a slideshow that I'm going to work from because I do think it's always very important to have a kind of path and a structure. You're welcome to ask questions at any point, and I'll try and stop in between to answer them, or we can save them till the end, at which time I can address any specific questions that any of you might have. So let's start, Chris, and we'll see where we're going. So basically, you want to be an arts worker. And I remember when I received the invitation to speak about this right now, I thought, oh my goodness, what a time to be talking about moving from being an artist to an arts worker. This is certainly, people keep saying unprecedented. And frankly, I heard one person say, oh, we should stop saying that. But I can't stop saying it because I've actually never experienced this before in my many years of working, where you actually are doing something and then you're just forced to stop, and for almost 11 to 12 weeks at this point. So it really is interesting to be talking about this at this time. But then I started to think about how important it is to start to become more aware of what you're doing and why you're doing it. And so we can go to the next slide, Chris. So basically, what happens, and what I've noticed in my experience, is that artists, particularly people who are creators and are working inside the arts industry, they start to look at how competitive it is. There's many more artists than there are jobs oftentimes. It's a vulnerable sector at even the best of times. We can be in the best economy possible, and artists are vulnerable. You can tell when you start to look at the stats. Income is very challenging. If you think about the typical artist making just not even $25,000 a year is the average median income. So, and an arts worker is almost $42,000. In the city of Toronto, you know how hard that is to think about working. And if you think about the average wage and the fact that you could have been working at that wage for 10 or 15 years, because the actual growth within organizations is challenging. There's a vulnerability to being an artist and an arts worker. And so, that would be one of the reasons that artists often think, well, maybe it would be better if instead of creating the art, I move over into the arts workers sector. You can go to the next slide. So basically, you think to yourself, okay, I'm an artist and I want to have a little bit more security. So now you need to think about what are you going to do, and how are you going to make the jump and the leap from being an artist to an arts worker. And this takes planning and it takes thought. And I think that the jump is something that you have to consider quite carefully before you understand what the difference is between being a creator and an artist, and then being an arts worker. Shall we move to the next one, Chris? So I think I always like to do the reality check when we start to talk about jumping from one part of the arts sector into another part of the arts sector. And the reality check, of course, comes down to what is it really like being an arts worker? Well, being an arts worker is not as it can be very unrewarding at times. It's a lot about multitasking. It's a lot about deadlines on top of deadlines. I mean, if you think about an arts worker, so we could be in the background starting work at 9 o'clock in the morning to get through to 5 o'clock, take about an hour break, and then we're back on site for whatever the performance is that we have set up so that the artists can do what they do best. When you're an arts worker, there are many voices that you have to listen to. As an artist, you're listening to yourself, or maybe to your conductor, or to your artist director. As a creator, you have that luxury of kind of picking and choosing who you're going to be listening to. But when you're an arts worker, you've got boards, you have communities, you have funders, you have donors, you have colleagues, you have artists, and so you're listening to all of the various sides and opinions and thoughts, and so you're trying to keep that measured as you're moving forward. There are government pressures when you're funded by different levels of government. You have to pay attention to what their interests are. Sometimes you can feel unappreciated as the arts worker. You do a lot of work in the background, and mostly the artists who perform are the ones who receive the applause. So certainly this can lead to a sense of being undervalued for the contribution you make. And certainly when you think about the hourly wage that we could talk about, certainly an artist is going to be, in many cases, as part of an institution, working at an hourly wage that's much higher than an arts worker. But then I like to say there's another side to this. So Chris, the reality check too is this. When you choose to be an arts worker, there are many, many rewarding parts of it. And this is everything from, you know, that some of the work that you do is contributing to the growth and the well-being of children. This extends into the community because you know that the arts that you are supporting are very important to connecting the community. We are the people who are working as part of the social fabric in a community. We are activating it, and so we are part of that energy. Arts workers, when you're in the background, you know that you're contributing to excellent concerts and artistic value that you're able to do. Part of what we're doing is creating joyful experiences. This is a very rewarding activity when you can be a part of and feel the joy that audiences take away from the experience that you've helped put together. And as an arts worker, what you really are also contributing to is the livelihood of close to 158,000 Canadian artists, because that's what our work is. Our work is creating the structure, the foundation, those things that surround and support what our artists in Canada do. And that is a very rewarding part of being an arts worker. We can go to the next slide, Chris. However, how do you become an arts worker? There's many things that we can talk about, but I have been teaching arts management for a long time. I spent almost 8 years with Western University teaching in the arts management diploma program, and I always started the 13 weeks that we would meet in these courses with a discussion about self-awareness. If you want to be a successful arts worker, if you think you want to jump from being an artist to an arts worker, I think it's really about really truly understanding who you are. You know, you can carry this forward to just about everything, but after really paying attention to it, I could give you a ton of tactics on how to do it, and we will talk a little bit about those. But the very first part is to spend time understanding who you are, what you do, to be able to determine whether or not you could actually be successful as an individual working in the arts, and particularly in the arts sector as an arts worker. It's about social awareness. It's about understanding how you fit in the framework of a community. It's about understanding your relationship management skills, your ability to work with people. When you have this kind of self-awareness, it's going to help you make a really good choice, and it will help you be very happy with the decision that you've made, rather than thinking that you have to do something because this is a way for you to support or work within the arts. So if we could go to the next one. So one of the things I like to share with colleagues and people that I work with is that self-awareness really comes from the power of knowing your strengths. And the thing is that very few people capitalize on their strengths. One of the things I'm very conscious of is a lot of our generational learning. The various generations have learned very differently. Certainly my generation and the generation just before me, there wasn't a lot of teaching on your strengths. What the teaching was that you identified what you could do, what you didn't do as well, and you should spend all of your time trying to do that better. This theory, and this is one that I appreciate and that I believe is actually a better theory for people to really think about whether or not they would want to work within the arts, is to actually try and understand what your strengths are. And once you understand your strengths, you should be able to then activate your strengths, because the time you spend working on and from your strengths is actually what's going to help you gain the confidence that you're going to be able to mitigate any kind of weaknesses that you might have. Knowing your strengths is a philosophy that actually can work really well when you think about wanting to work in the arts. I remember one young student that I had, we would always start all of our lessons or start the program with why you were in the course. Why were you coming to an arts management diploma program? And one person said to me, because I love theater. I absolutely love theater. I love acting. I love being a part of the plays. And so I heard that, and about 3 or 4 classes in, I asked her again, you know, how was she feeling about everything? And we started talking. And what I had to share with her is one of the realities of it is sometimes you may love performing and you may love the acting, but if you move away from that, how will that make you feel? How will you live with the fact that you're not creating, but instead working within the art? So, you know, would that hurt how you looked at the art? Would the magic of what the performance was be somehow lessened for you? Could you continue to go to the theater and really enjoy what the actors were doing on stage if you were working in behind? And so these are some of the questions that you need to ask yourself before you start to make a decision to move from creation to supporting. If we'll go to the next slide, Chris. One of the things that stops us from doing, to building on the strengths and understanding who we are as individuals is the notion, and when you're young, that somehow your personality is going to change and as you grow and as you mature. This is not true. I need to tell you that it's not that your personality changes. Basically, your values, the skills that you achieve when you're younger, you will maintain those all your life. What will happen is your behaviors may change around them, and the dominant aspects of your personality are always going to remain the same. If you become more in touch with those real strong aspects of your personality, then you have a much better chance of leveraging them going forward. Another reason that we sometimes stop focusing on our strengths, Chris, you could go to the next slide, is that when you're working within an industry, we're told that good team members do whatever it takes to help the team. And actually, that is also something that's not very true, that good teams are made up of people with different strengths. You don't necessarily want a person who can do many things. What you do want is a team that can do many things. And so you want to be working in an environment with people who complement your strengths or add to your strengths. And there's not this expectation that everybody is going to be able to do one thing well. There should be core aspects to what you are and what you can do. And then you look to others to be able to help round them out. We can go to the next slide. So how do you discover your strengths? There's lots of ways to do this. I would recommend Strengths Finder, Marcus Buckingham's book. I've always thought that it was a good way to just get a sense of who you are. When it came out something like 15 years ago, I ended up doing it and discovered my 5 core strengths. And I can share with you that when I did it again 10 years later, 3 of those core strengths had stayed the same. 2 of them had changed slightly. So the idea that behaviors, things I had learned about myself and things that I had worked on, changed a little bit, still in the same category of strengths, but they've been refined a little bit. And I thought that was an interesting tool to see that once I had started to apply what I thought were my strengths, I was able to build on them. So one of the things that you really need to do is to think about the patterns of your life experience. Even as a young person, you've probably noticed what you've done well and what you haven't done well. And if you pay attention to them, you can start to see the patterns of what you have achieved, what has been something that you've enjoyed. It is part of the way that you're going to be able to identify your talents, your skills, your knowledge. And I am a big advocate of doing as much of the kinds of testing that you can to be able to learn more about who you are. The Myers-Briggs is a good measure. The 16 personalities that you can do online is a good measure. Strengths Finder is a good measure. They can give you enough insight to really start to try and capitalize on what you do well. And the things that you're going to start to notice are your strengths, are the things that you do consistently and near perfectly, and that you enjoy doing. And you will want to take a look at what you've done in your work environments, if you've been volunteering or if you've been working in some fashion. You want to pay attention to what you've learned there, what you've enjoyed, what you haven't enjoyed, and you start to pay attention to that part as evidence of what you can and can't do. Or want to do. The next slide, please. So you need to take stock. You need to look at your successes. You need to write them down. You need to understand that knowing that you can do something or believing you can do something is going to be an important part of identifying your strengths and being able to then market those strengths appropriately. You should pay attention to your intuition if you're drawn to something, or that you feel something about it before you do it. You need to understand that that is part of how you can identify and leverage what you can start to see that you're good at. And if you think about, if you apply this to some of the things that we'll be talking about in arts working, this is where you do want to try and take stock of what you're enjoy and what you're doing well, because the idea of creation, while you have many of the good skill sets that will draw over into something else, you do need to have a sense that you are passionate and interested in it. If you want to take stock, pay attention to those things that you do quickly, you learn quickly, you don't struggle to concentrate on, that you feel good when you're doing it. That will be something that's helpful. And you also have to pay attention to how you feel after you've done the activity, because that's going to help you identify your own personal self-awareness needs. What are you satisfied by? What gives you a feeling of accomplishment? When do you walk away happy from this? We'll go to the next slide, Chris. So let's look back and recall when you had a sense of pride or satisfaction in something that you did. Remember those stories where your accomplishments were significant and satisfying for you. Identify the situation, the action, result. This is a really good little skill to be able to come to terms with long-term in your careers, is identifying a situation, the action or the behavior that you took with it, and the result of it. And you will start to see where you can again, see patterns that will help you learn more about yourself and your strengths. And again, looking for common themes is very important. Chris? So what are you going to need if you want to work in the arts? So I've talked a little bit about, you know, becoming self-aware, being aware of who you are as a person, what you think your strengths are, what is important for you to leverage of those strengths, and now can I take that and become an arts worker? So I decided that I would figure out what I really thought was most important to being a successful arts worker. And being a successful arts worker, I believe, means that you have to have strong emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is when you can empathize with the other person. It's when you can see a situation. It's when you can listen to something and get beyond how you're feeling about it and more about how the other person is feeling about it. Working within the arts, it is a tremendous skill that you're going to need to have to be successful, because you are working continuously with creators, with artists who have a particular sensibility that has to be respected and nurtured and encouraged. You're going to be working with other colleagues who have a sensitivity to certain issues that you have to pay attention to. And then you've got audience members, and you have to be able to be empathizing with them when they're in a hall that's not warm enough for them or cold enough for them. And I know it sounds silly, but this is what emotional intelligence is, and probably is one of the most important attributes of a good, successful arts worker. Creativity is also something that you're going to need, and it's not creativity in the sense of creation, but more like innovation. Creativity to be able to contribute to an idea, build on it, think about how it can be built. Ideas can be built on to move the organization forward or the art form forward, or can create something so it's an experience that's beyond what somebody might be expecting. Active learning is necessary with a growth mindset. I think that the successful arts worker is somebody who is always wanting to learn, is always curious, is always thinking about what could we do differently? How could we move this forward? What is the solution to this problem? You need to be you can't expect to go into the industry that we're in thinking that it is a stagnant, or it's going to be 9 to 5, or it's going to be secure. All of this active learning that you need to have with the idea of growth becomes critical to being a good and successful arts worker. Communication skills are very important. You have to be able to carry on conversations with many different people. You have to be interested in what they're saying. You have to pay attention. Good writing skills are necessary. I would also say that strength of opinion, balanced, is going to be something that's important. And so you should take stock of how well you are able to communicate your opinion or your idea forward. Diversity and cultural intelligence, oh my goodness, this is extremely important in the arts we're working in today. The traditional arts, specifically the ones we're working in, orchestras, theater, museums, diversity is going to become, if it isn't already, one of the biggest challenges we have coming from Western European art forms. It's how do we embrace the idea of inclusion when we work in art forms that are as old as they are in a particular niche area that they are, and what are the ways we can change that, and how do we embrace new and different voices within this canon. So I think that that's certainly something that needs to be built on and strengthened. Technology skills are going to be important. I again laugh about this as a generational issue. I've tried to be as technically savvy as possible. I'm not nearly as savvy as the young people working on my team. As a leader, I let them do what they do best. I don't try and get in their way. I try not to make assumptions about the technology. I try to learn about it. I'm not nearly as good a user of it as other people, but I do think that as we move forward in the arts, our ability to understand how the digital world is going to contribute to what we're doing is going to be important. Embracing change is extremely important in the arts, and one of the things that you need to become very self-aware of is how change affects you. What do you do when things change? How do you participate in change? Change is something that arts workers need to deal with on not only a yearly basis, but almost on a daily, monthly basis, because nothing is static in the arts. As being an arts worker, in the behind the scenes, sometimes I try to explain it like a duck. You're watching a duck floating across a pond. You see this graceful, calm duck that just is just kind of like taking care, looking at the world in such an easygoing way, and you forget that underneath the water, those feet are churning. This is what the arts is often. Those of us in the background, it's never static, it's always changing, and that you do have to pay attention to that. I can't remember if I have a last slide, Chris. Oh, I do. I have development tools. So how will you do some of this? Education is certainly something. If you decide that as an artist you want to move into the arts sector as a worker, I do think that taking an arts management diploma, certificate, or even just courses in it are very helpful. They are typically a good way for you to get a good sense of the kinds of skill sets that you're going to need. I'd also say that understanding business and business rigor is a good opportunity to start to leverage knowledge. So understanding the premise of how organizations function through either leadership training or through organizational management training or even just through entrepreneurship training. Taking any kind of education in those areas will help you be a successful arts worker. And then the experience is something that's going to help you move forward in the arts industry. You need to find challenging experiences that are going to stretch you. So if you're thinking you want to be an arts worker, perhaps what you should do is volunteer in a capacity that's going to stretch you. It's not about being an usher or pulling paper, but participating in a project that is going to ask you to go beyond what you actually think you might be able to do. You can work with people that you trust and that you want to learn from. Mentoring is not a bad idea. If calling up people within the industry that you respect, that you would like to learn from, a series of meetings with people to see whether or not you think that working as an arts administrator or an arts worker would be beneficial for you would be a good way to do it. I think that every task that you take on needs to be more complex than the one you did before it. This is a good way for you to challenge yourself and see whether or not you've got the capacity to be able to take on the kinds of work that the arts sector has. And I do think that it's also important for you to understand that even though arts workers should come and leverage their strengths, you do want to have knowledge in more than one area. Arts organizations tend to be small. Certainly in Canada, they're medium or small. Large organizations like the large orchestras, the Stratfords, the Shaws, those ones are a little bit more like the typical business organization with departments and sections. When you work for a medium or a small-sized organization, you're going to want to be able to leverage strengths across a couple of different disciplines. So you might find that you're a really great project manager who also understands how to keep I don't know, project manager who also understands the education sector. So your contribution could be important to a smaller organization that needs, that can't afford to have any more people. So I think that's I don't think I have the last one. Oh yes, I do have a side. I have this, I was in Spain and this is actually Salvador Dali's museum. I loved this ceiling mural that he was there. But I thought it was kind of neat, this quote, "Art, freedom, and creativity will change society faster than politics." If you go into the arts, I think you have to believe this. You have to believe that you are making a contribution to society in the most positive and constructive way. And if you are going to be coming into that, you should be looking at, you should be, the foundation of your strength should be able to do that. So I see that someone, thank you so much. I'm willing to take any questions at this point. I'm always much better at questions than I am sometimes just spouting. But I can talk about my day-to-day as executive director. So before quarantine, so 12 weeks ago, my day was typically as executive director, meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting. And I would meet with the music director or the musicians. I would meet with the production team. I'd meet with the finance team. I'd meet with the marketing team. I'd meet with the development team. I would then be writing reports for the board. I I would be looking at the numbers on a daily basis. I would be chatting with someone about a human resources issue. And I remember one of my colleagues saying to me after she happened to be having to, I can't remember what it was, but she was following me for the day, and she said, "Oh my God," she said, "I'm not sure I could do what you do, because you're constantly moving from the next discussion to the next discussion to the next discussion, and how do you keep it all straight?" So that was before quarantine. And after quarantine, it's actually all the same. I start at about 7 o'clock in the morning, sometimes 8 o'clock. I work probably through till about 7 at night. And instead of meeting with people, I'm actually on Zoom meetings, meeting with the same people. So I have development meetings, I have board meetings, I have executive meetings, finance meetings. I have a lot of different meetings. The executive director of a medium-sized arts organization like mine is really a little bit of a central core. If you think about a wheel, and I like to think about our arts organizations as wheels, because every part of the spoke is important. The artist's production, the artist's creativity, the programming, to the production of it, to the marketing of it, to the raising the funds for it. Every one of those spokes, and I'm kind of sitting in the middle, just kind of making sure that the wheel keeps turning. That's the role that typically, I would hope, a good executive director is doing. What you're doing is allowing people's strengths to really come to fruition. And I hope that's what I'm doing when I'm working every day with my team. Madeline has asked, how to balance both when you're interested in performing and administration. So Madeline, that's a really, really great question. And I'm not sure I have the best answer, but I can share with you a couple of examples. I was working with a young arts administrator. He'd been in the arts industry about 8 years, and he was working in the marketing department. And doing a very, very good job. He was a terrific arts administrator, but he also played an instrument, and he was a part of a quartet. And so he was struggling because he couldn't balance both. The demands of his role as an arts administrator meant that it was, as necessary, a 40 to 50 hour week. And so when was he getting his time to practice? When was his time for performance? So what he did was he actually sat down and did this strengths and values review of himself, so that, and he had his 8 years of working for, so that he could use his experiences and what he'd been doing to really make a determination, because his struggle was, how could he balance both? In the end, he decided to give up the performing so that he could concentrate on becoming a better, or the best arts administrator that he could be. I have another example of an individual who is also a performer and a professional performer, while also working as an arts administrator in the education discipline of an arts organization. And again, this individual was struggling with how to balance the two, and made a different decision from the previous person I was speaking about. Actually had to set hours, and said to both the organization she was working with and to herself, I will only commit this number of hours a week to my job as an arts administrator, because I need the other hours to be able to balance my practicing and the performance that I want to do. So really, the suggestions on how you do both, it's a mindset for yourself. It is about discipline and deciding what's most important to you, because once you have made a commitment to something, you can set the rules for it. It's funny, you know, the whole idea of balancing performing and administration is like balancing anything else. You know, parents who work within the arts industry are stretched at all times, and they have to make rules and work with arts organizations to say that I'm only going to be able to commit this much time. You can't expect this much time from me when I'm also got children to raise. And I do think that these are important discussions that people should be able to have with their organizations and with their colleagues, so that everyone has the opportunity to balance what is important to them. So I don't know, Madeline, if that helps, but I do think you're in control of that. The balance is at your is in your control. So I don't know if anybody else has any other questions or wanted to make any comments on anything.
Okay. I think that may bring the end of the question portion here, Carol. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciated the reminder to kind of look at our strengths and to really reflect on ourselves to guide, you know, our decisions. So thank you so very much for being with us today.
Okay, thank you, Chris. It was a lot of fun.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Oh. Let's stay. Wonderful.
So Jessica, you squeezed in there just before the end. I do think that how do I see things changing for arts administrators? I think I think this is a real reality check, in the sense of, I think there are going to be fewer jobs in the arts administration sector, because I do think there's going to be fewer organizations. I think that there's going to be more consolidation of arts organizations, which might lead, I hope, to more specialized workers, so that we will not hire generalists, but actually people with real skill sets in certain areas. For example, you hire in the education sector people who have education experience or education learnings or teachings. Within the marketing sector, you don't hire people who love the arts. You hire people who have marketing degrees and marketing knowledge or marketing experience. I think that this is going to become really important for arts organizations moving forward, so that we can leverage specialization and experience in the arts, so that we can stabilize structures upon which our arts institutions exist. We've been working in a vulnerable business model that's not sustainable. So I think that we're going to have to be challenged to figure out how to be a little bit more entrepreneurial and think a little bit in those ways. I hope that helps. I'm not grim about it. I don't want you to think at all that I'm grim about it, because I do believe that the arts is always going to exist, and that there will always be arts workers who need to support artists, mostly because I believe it's important to the community. And as long as the community is asking for it, which it is, you will have arts organizations and people who need to work in the backstage and in the behind scenes to make it happen. Hannah, how can we use our musical arts backgrounds to get into the field? So this is a really good question. And in a non-musical artistic field. That's interesting. I'm trying a non-musical artistic field. So This is where you go in and you take a look at those skill sets that as a musician you have acquired. For example, discipline. First of all, I have not yet met a musician who isn't, well, let me say, if you're a professional musician, you're very disciplined because you have to practice. If you don't practice regularly, if you don't have a commitment to that kind of rigor and discipline, you're probably not going to be as successful a musician as that person who does have that. So I would say, okay, so if you do that, there's your skill set, you're disciplined. If you take a sense of other things that you've learned as a musician, time management. Time management is certainly something that you probably could note that you have. As a musician, you likely are, the word I'm looking for is not narrow-minded, broad-minded. I'm sorry, I've just lost the word. But when you think about what musicians have to do, you have to have a lot of, you have that ability to see beyond just kind of the page, right? A score or a piece of music's presented to you, but you're expected to interpret it. You're expected to read it and then put some kind of framework around it. That is a skill set that you can apply to any non-musical artistic field, because you have to be able to read something and speculate and make it bigger and tell a story about it. That's another thing. Musicians are storytellers. So capitalize on how you tell a story and understand that you can tell a story because you've learned how to do that through what you've been reading or what you've been doing as a musician. So I would say that that's what you have to do, is you don't talk about the actual practice of being a musician. You talk about the skills that it takes for you to be a musician, and those skills are the things that are transferable to other arts disciplines. For example, our marketing director comes from theater, and it's the skills that she's bringing. It's not the background of theater. I've never joined an arts organization actually knowing anything about the art I was going into. My first professional role was as the marketing and development director of a regional theater. I'd never worked in a theater. I'd never acted. I had no clue about the actual art and what it was supposed to be, but I had a ton of transferable skills. And I think that's what you have to sit down and take a look at, identify those, and those will really stand you in good stead. I hope that was helpful.
Give it another little breath here, just in case another question slips in.
You know, it's funny, I've often, because I worked in the media for almost 20 years before I started to move into the arts sector, and I often think, okay, what was the reason I moved from this? And I also spent a year away from the arts working in the private sector, and I realized that my self-awareness was that I need to be able to believe that I'm contributing positively to the community. So in order to do that, I realized that the private sector was not going to give me that personal satisfaction, and hence I actually came back to the arts sector, because every time I go to work, I know that what I'm doing is creating something positive in our world. Yes, I absolutely do, Nina. I think that for sure. I do see value in the arts administration programs, even though specialization, because they give you a very solid, I wouldn't say do the 2 or 3. I don't think you need to do anything more than a 1-year certificate. Humber College has a great 1-year certificate program. And the reason it's valuable is because it gives you oversight over the entire arts organization's framework. And then, and I have suggested this in the past, other people, is that once you've seen that overall framework, you get a much better sense of where you'd like to apply yourself, and then you go and get that specialization, because that will help you further your arts career in that kind of way. It also makes it a lot easier on you, because you start to, again, leverage all your strengths, because you have now the knowledge of the whole thing, and then you can say, what I really love is working and helping children learn. So you're going to focus on the education sector, or I really get a kick out of figuring out how to get more. I have somebody on my team who's challenged totally by getting people to buy tickets. Hey, if that's what motivates you, and you've learned that that's a skill set that makes you happy, then that's what you're going to be able to do. So yeah, I think that I do think there's value in it for sure. Is it enough to get into the field to only have a music degree? No. I'm sorry, it isn't, Hannah. A music degree is great knowledge, it's great experience, and it is a very solid reason to want to go into the arts. But to be an arts administrator, I do believe you are going to need some kind of business educate. Like when I say business, an arts management certificate is the kind of thing that you will need to complement your knowledge base, because the knowledge you have will make you a great storyteller. It will help you appreciate what the artists want to do. It will give you leverage over other candidates who want to work, for example, in an musical arts organization. But you need, I think, to have a little bit better understanding of how the administration and the business side works, to be able to really use that music degree to the best advantage. It's a good group.
Yeah, it's been going really great, actually. Okay, Carol, I think that might be it. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And those last questions were great. So thank you for taking the time to answer those.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Have a good rest of the day. Bye.